The people who smile the calmest are usually the ones already watching everything. Snow pressed softly against the tall glass windows of the Marlowe Grand Hotel, while downtown Chicago disappeared beneath freezing rain and silver streetlights outside. Inside the restaurant lounge, expensive jazz drifted through warm golden lighting, while wealthy executives laughed too loudly around crystal glasses and untouched desserts. Every table looked polished, controlled, elegant, but Claire Bennett knew better. She had worked enough nights inside luxury restaurants to understand one quiet truth rich people never admitted aloud. The more expensive the room became, the more carefully people hid what they feared losing. Claire moved calmly between tables, carrying a silver tray balanced perfectly against one hand, while soft reflections from chandeliers shimmered across the black marble floors beneath her shoes. Her dark waitress uniform remained perfectly pressed despite the chaos building around the dinner rush. Calm eyes, quiet posture, nothing dramatic about her at first glance, which was exactly why most people underestimated her. Near the center of the restaurant, the private executive table remained unusually tense compared to the rest of the room. 5 men in tailored suits sat around expensive whiskey glasses, speaking in voices low enough to avoid attention, but sharp enough to cut through the music whenever silence fell. At the head of the table sat Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Dynamics, 42 years old. Cold reputation, billion-dollar contracts. The kind of man financial magazines described as brilliant because nobody wanted to call him ruthless publicly. Ethan adjusted the silver cuff of his watch while reviewing documents spread across the table beside his drink. Even sitting still, he carried the energy of someone used to controlling every room he entered. Claire approached quietly with fresh coffee. "Refill, sir." Ethan barely looked up. "You remembered I drink coffee black." Claire poured carefully without spilling a single drop. "You asked for it 23 minutes ago." One executive laughed softly under his breath. Ethan finally glanced toward her now. Calm face, steady hands, observant eyes. Most waitresses avoided direct eye contact around men like him. She did not. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. "Good memory." Claire offered a small, polite smile. "Part of the job." But Ethan noticed something unusual immediately. She scanned the table once while serving drinks. Not nervously, methodically, as though quietly recording details most people ignored. His instincts sharpened instantly. Across the restaurant, another waitress nearly dropped a tray after one guest raised his voice impatiently. Claire moved automatically toward the younger employee, steadied the tray with one hand, and whispered something that instantly calmed the frightened girl beside the wine station. Ethan watched the interaction silently. "Interesting," he murmured. One of his executives looked confused. "What?" Ethan nodded subtly toward Claire. "She notices everything." Meanwhile, Claire returned toward the executive table carrying another folder one assistant accidentally left behind near the hostess station. The moment she placed it beside Ethan, one loose paper slid partially free. Numbers. Financial projections. Nothing she should technically study. Yet one small detail caught her eye instantly before she looked away. A shipping figure repeated twice under different subsidiaries. Claire's expression changed almost invisibly for half a second before her face returned to calm professionalism. Ethan noticed that too. "Problem?" he asked quietly. Claire met his gaze evenly. "No, sir." But Ethan heard hesitation. Small, controlled, real. He leaned back slowly while rain streaked the dark windows behind him. "You looked at the numbers." "Accidentally." "And?" Claire adjusted the edge of the folder carefully. "I serve food, sir." Ethan's voice cooled slightly. "That was not my question." Several executives glanced awkwardly between them now, while jazz music drifted softly across the restaurant lounge. Claire remained calm beneath the attention. One line item appears repeated. Silence settled across the table instantly. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Which one?" Claire pointed politely toward the document without touching it directly. "Westbridge Logistics appears twice under separate acquisition categories." One executive immediately shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another reached too quickly for his whiskey glass. Ethan noticed every reaction. Claire stepped back slightly. It could simply be formatting. Ethan stared down at the paper now. She was right. Exactly right. The duplicate charge had already caused internal confusion during preliminary reviews earlier that week. Yet nobody outside upper management should have recognized it from a 3-second glance across a crowded restaurant. Ethan slowly looked back up at her. You studied accounting? Claire shook her head once. Statistics. Where? Northwestern. One executive nearly laughed in disbelief. You are serving tables with a Northwestern statistics degree? Claire answered calmly. Student loans do not really disappear because somebody owns textbooks. Ethan studied her more carefully now. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Just honest. That unsettled him strangely. He spent years surrounded by people constantly performing intelligence for approval. Claire carried hers quietly like something she no longer needed validated. Ethan closed the folder slowly. Sit down. Several executives looked shocked by the request. Claire blinked once. Excuse me. Humor me for 5 minutes. His tone remained calm, but carried the natural authority of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. Claire hesitated briefly before sitting carefully at the empty chair nearest the edge of the table. Ethan folded his hands together while rain continued tapping softly against the windows outside. If somebody were hiding money inside overlapping acquisitions, he asked quietly, what would they need most? Claire answered almost immediately. A distraction. One executive shifted again. Ethan noticed. Explain. Claire glanced once around the table before speaking carefully. Most financial deception is not hidden through complexity. It is hidden through emotional focus. Ethan leaned slightly forward now. Interested despite himself, Claire continued softly. People stop noticing details when they are busy protecting status. Silence settled heavily around the table after that sentence. Somewhere deeper inside the restaurant, a piano melody drifted softly beneath chandelier light, while snow continued falling across downtown Chicago outside. Ethan looked at Claire for several long seconds without speaking, because suddenly the waitress sitting quietly beside his executive table no longer looked ordinary at all. She looked dangerous in the calmest possible way. And somewhere near the far end of the table, one executive quietly loosened his tie beneath the warm restaurant lighting for the very first time that night. The jazz music never stopped, but the atmosphere around Ethan Cole's table changed completely after Claire Bennett pointed out the duplicated acquisition line. One sentence from a waitress had done what 3 internal audits failed to do. Silence settled heavily beneath the golden chandelier lights while snow continued drifting outside the tall windows of the Marlowe Grand Hotel. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair, fingers resting against the edge of the financial folder, while his executives avoided looking directly at him now. Claire noticed that immediately. Fear always moved first through the eyes before it reached the voice. You said distraction matters more than complexity, Ethan said calmly while studying her expression. Claire nodded once. Usually. And what distracts powerful people most? One executive shifted uncomfortably beside his whiskey glass. Another checked his phone too quickly without unlocking the screen. Claire remained calm beneath all of it. Ego. The word landed softly but sharply enough to cut through the table. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Across the restaurant, waiters carried fresh steaks and expensive wine toward other tables while laughter drifted through the warm lounge as though nothing dangerous was unfolding beneath the elegant lighting. But Claire felt the tension tightening quietly around the executives now. Especially one man sitting 3 seats away from Ethan. Daniel Mercer, Chief Financial Officer. Gray suit, silver watch, controlled smile that looked practiced instead of natural. Claire noticed his left hand tapping once against the edge of the crystal glass every time finances were mentioned. Small detail, but nervous people always repeated movements before they lost composure. Ethan closed the folder carefully. How long have you been working here? For years. And before that? Claire adjusted the silver tray resting lightly against her side. Graduate school. Statistics. Yes. Ethan studied her another moment beneath the dim golden lighting. You ever work in corporate finance? Claire shook her head softly. No. Daniel finally laughed quietly beside them. Then maybe we should not treat dinner observations like federal investigations. Several executives chuckled awkwardly in relief. Ethan never looked away from Claire, though. Maybe. Claire noticed Daniel's tone immediately. Too quick. Too dismissive. People with nothing to hide rarely rushed to minimize discomfort. She picked up an empty whiskey glass from the table calmly. Would anyone like another refill? Daniel answered too fast. No. Ethan glanced slowly toward him now. Interesting. Claire turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her again. Stay close. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable looks after that. Claire raised one eyebrow slightly. That sounds less like a dinner request. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. Humor me. Claire gave a small polite nod before returning toward the service station near the bar. Behind the polished wood counter, another waitress leaned closer immediately. What did you say to that table? Claire grabbed a clean coffee pot calmly. Nothing dangerous. The finance guy looks like he swallowed glass. Claire almost smiled faintly. People become uncomfortable when somebody notices details they hoped were invisible. Near the executive table, Ethan reopened the folder slowly while Daniel loosened his tie beneath the warm restaurant lighting. You are seriously entertaining theories from a waitress? Daniel asked quietly. Ethan flipped through the acquisition pages without looking up. You are seriously nervous about one? Daniel forced a laugh. Come on. But Ethan noticed it now too. The shifting posture. The defensive tone. The tiny layer of sweat forming despite the cold weather outside. Ethan had built billion-dollar companies by trusting instincts before explanations. And his instincts rarely reacted this sharply without reason. Across the room, Claire quietly delivered wine to another couple seated near the fireplace while observing the executive table through reflections in the mirrored wall behind the bar. Daniel leaned toward another executive and whispered something quickly. The other man looked down immediately afterward. Avoidance again. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Then she noticed another detail. Daniel kept checking the same silver watch every few minutes. Swiss-made. Dark blue face. Expensive enough to buy a small car. But the watch itself was not important. The engraving on the inside edge was. She had seen it earlier while pouring drinks. W.L. Holdings. Same initials attached to the duplicated logistics subsidiary hidden inside Ethan's documents. Claire stood completely still for half a second. There it was. Not proof, but direction. Nearby, the younger waitress whispered again nervously. You okay? Claire blinked softly and returned to motion. Fine. But her mind already moved through numbers, names, and reactions with cold precision now. Ethan suddenly stood from the table. The entire executive section quieted immediately. Gentlemen, he said calmly, I think tonight's meeting is finished. Daniel looked stunned. We still need to finalize the merger presentation. Ethan buttoned his coat slowly. Tomorrow. But investors are flying in at 8 in the morning. Ethan finally looked directly at him now. Then they can enjoy Chicago breakfast. Daniel forced another laugh that sounded weaker this time. You are overreacting because a waitress noticed a typo. Ethan's expression never changed. Maybe. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward Claire across the restaurant. Or maybe somebody finally said something honest inside this room. Silence followed him as he walked away from the table toward the lounge windows overlooking the snowy city outside. Claire continued serving drinks as though nothing happened, but she felt Ethan watching her now. Not like a customer observing a waitress, like a man trying to solve something. Several minutes later, Ethan approached the coffee station alone while soft piano music drifted through the lounge. You made Daniel nervous. Claire poured fresh coffee calmly. I did not say much. Exactly. Snow pressed softly against the dark windows behind him while Chicago traffic blurred beneath freezing rain outside. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. Most people panic when accused. Claire handed him the coffee cup carefully. The smart ones panic when observed. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds after that sentence. There was no arrogance in her voice. No attempt to impress him, which somehow impressed him more. Claire finally glanced toward him directly. You brought your executive team here tonight because you already suspected something was wrong. Ethan did not answer immediately. Claire continued softly. You were testing reactions. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. She noticed too much. And now, she asked. Ethan looked toward Daniel across the room, laughing too loudly beside another executive near the bar. Then back toward Claire beneath the warm restaurant lighting. Now I am wondering why the only person who noticed the problem works for tips instead of my company. Claire gave a small tired smile while adjusting the edge of her apron. Maybe because your company never thought to look for people like me. Somewhere near the piano, the music softened into something slower while snow continued falling endlessly beyond the windows. Ethan watched Claire quietly then. Calm posture, sharp mind, unshaken eyes. And for the first time all evening, the powerful CEO realized he was no longer controlling the conversation the way he intended when he entered the restaurant tonight. By 10:30 that night, the Marlowe Grand Hotel had grown quieter, But the tension around Ethan Cole never fully disappeared. Snow continued falling outside the towering windows overlooking downtown Chicago, while fewer guests remained inside the restaurant lounge beneath the warm chandelier glow. Most executives had already left after the uncomfortable dinner meeting, yet Daniel Mercer stayed behind near the private whiskey bar, speaking in low tones with another board member beside the fireplace. Claire Bennett noticed immediately that Daniel kept checking whether Ethan was watching him. Guilty people rarely feared accusations first. They feared observation. Behind the service counter, Claire polished wine glasses slowly while soft jazz drifted through the nearly empty restaurant. Another waitress leaned toward her carefully. "Your finance guy still looks nervous." Claire glanced briefly toward Daniel without moving her head much. "Because he thinks the conversation ended." "Did it?" Claire set one clean glass beside the others calmly. "Not for him." Near the lounge windows, Ethan stood alone reviewing documents on a tablet while city lights shimmered against the snow outside. His posture remained controlled, but Claire noticed something had shifted since earlier. The CEO who entered the restaurant expecting obedience now looked distracted by uncertainty instead. Not weakness. Calculation. Ethan trusted systems more than instincts most of his career. Tonight a waitress disrupted both. Claire picked up a fresh coffee pot and crossed the restaurant floor quietly toward him. "Refill." Ethan looked up slowly. "You always appear right before silence becomes uncomfortable." Claire poured carefully into the cup beside him. "Part of hospitality." Ethan studied her expression another moment. "You really think Daniel is hiding something?" Claire answered honestly. "I think he is afraid." "There is a difference." Claire placed the coffee pot down gently beside the table. "Not always." Ethan leaned slightly against the edge of the window while snow drifted softly beyond the glass behind him. "You built an entire theory from one duplicated number and nervous body language." Claire folded her hands lightly in front of her apron. "Patterns matter. And if you are wrong." Her expression never changed. "Then nothing happens." Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. "And if you are right." Claire glanced once toward Daniel near the fireplace. "Then somebody close to you has been lying for a long time." Silence settled softly between them while piano music drifted across the dim restaurant. Ethan watched her carefully now. Calm posture. No need to impress him. No fear of him either. That unsettled him more than confidence ever could. Most people around Ethan either flattered him or feared him. Claire did neither. Across the room, Daniel suddenly stood from the bar and headed toward the hallway leading to the private conference suites upstairs. Fast pace. Tight shoulders. No drink in his hand anymore. Claire noticed instantly. Ethan followed her gaze. "What?" Claire lowered her voice slightly. "He is moving differently now." Ethan looked confused. "Meaning?" "People walk faster when they think time is running out." Ethan stared toward the hallway thoughtfully while Daniel disappeared around the corner. Claire reached for the empty coffee cup calmly. "You should probably ask yourself one question." Ethan looked back at her. "Which question?" Claire met his gaze evenly beneath the golden lights. "Why would a man with nothing to hide suddenly need privacy after a duplicated acquisition gets noticed?" Ethan said nothing for several seconds. Then he picked up his coat from the chair beside him. "Come with me." Claire blinked once. "Excuse me." "You noticed the problem?" His voice remained calm, but firm now. "Help me understand it." Claire almost smiled faintly. "You realize this is a terrible human resources decision." Ethan actually laughed softly under his breath. The sound surprised both of them. "Probably." Upstairs, the executive conference floor remained nearly empty except for low lighting and the distant hum of heating vents against the winter storm outside. Ethan walked ahead through the hallway while Claire followed several steps behind carrying a small tray simply to avoid looking suspicious near hotel security cameras. Near Conference Suite B, voices echoed faintly through the closed door. Daniel's voice. Agitated. Claire stopped walking immediately. Ethan noticed. "What?" Claire lowered her voice. "Listen." They stood silently near the hallway corner while muffled conversation slipped beneath the doorway. "I told you the numbers were buried," Daniel whispered sharply. Another voice answered too quietly to recognize. Then Daniel again. "No." Ethan suspects something now. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Claire watched carefully without reacting emotionally. This was the difference between anger and observation. Angry people lost focus. Observant people gathered proof quietly. Ethan stepped toward the conference room door. but Claire touched his sleeve lightly before he reached it. Wait. Ethan looked down at her hand briefly. Claire released it immediately. If he sees emotion on your face now, he changes strategy. Ethan stared at her for a second. You do this often? My father gambled away 3 houses before I turned 16. Her voice remained calm. People hiding things usually panic in predictable ways. The sentence settled heavily between them. Ethan looked at her differently after that. Not just intelligent, experienced, quietly hardened by survival in ways expensive boardrooms could never teach. Inside the conference room, silence suddenly replaced the whispers. Then footsteps approached the door. Claire reacted instantly. She lifted the tray casually while Ethan stepped aside toward the hallway window as though discussing business. Daniel exited the conference room seconds later and froze slightly after noticing them standing there. Ethan. His smile looked forced now. Still here? Ethan remained perfectly calm. Thought I left. Daniel adjusted his cuff nervously. No, I just figured. Claire noticed it immediately then. The silver Swiss watch beneath Daniel's sleeve reflected the hallway light again. W.L. Holdings engraved inside the metal edge. Same initials connected to the hidden acquisition company. Her eyes narrowed slightly. There it was again. Daniel followed her glance unconsciously and covered the watch too quickly afterward. Mistake. Ethan saw that movement too. Tiny, but real. Claire spoke softly before silence stretched too long. Sir, the kitchen asked whether your executive guests still wanted dessert sent upstairs. Daniel answered immediately. No, too sharp. Too fast. Ethan looked at him carefully now while the snowstorm continued beyond the tall hallway windows. Then slowly, almost casually, Ethan asked the question that changed the atmosphere completely. Daniel. The CFO forced another smile. Yeah. Ethan's voice lowered slightly. What exactly does WL Holdings stand for? Daniel's face lost color almost instantly beneath the soft conference floor lighting. And beside the hallway window, Claire Bennett quietly realized the most dangerous moment in any betrayal was never the lie itself. It was the second somebody finally asked the right question. Daniel Mercer did not answer immediately after Ethan asked about WL Holdings. The silence itself became an answer long before words arrived. Soft lighting reflected across the polished conference hallway while snow continued sliding down the dark hotel windows outside. Claire Bennett stood quietly beside the service tray without moving, watching every small reaction unfold across Daniel's face with calm precision. First confusion, then calculation, then fear. The order never changed when people realized they were losing control. Daniel forced a weak smile that never reached his eyes. It is a private investment group. Ethan remained perfectly still. Interesting. Daniel adjusted his silver watch again unconsciously. Mistake. I have several private investments. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Then why is your private investment group connected to duplicated acquisition entries inside my company files? Daniel laughed softly, but tension cracked through the sound now. You are seriously building a conspiracy theory because a waitress noticed accounting overlap? Claire watched Ethan carefully after that sentence. Daniel made another mistake without realizing it. Guilty people attacked credibility once facts became dangerous. Ethan folded his arms slowly beneath the warm hallway lights. You seem unusually focused on the waitress. Daniel looked away briefly. I am focused on protecting the company from paranoia. Claire finally spoke quietly. People protecting companies usually answer questions directly. Daniel's jaw tightened instantly. And people serving coffee usually stay out of executive business. The insult landed softly in the hallway. Deliberate. Sharp. But Claire's expression never changed. Ethan noticed that too. Most people became defensive when humiliated publicly. Claire became quieter instead, which somehow carried more weight. Ethan stepped slightly closer toward Daniel now. Answer the question. Daniel hesitated 1 second too long. It is a holding group used during preliminary acquisitions. Owned by who? Another pause. Tiny. Fatal. Investors. Ethan stared at him silently while the heating vents hummed softly above them. Then Ethan spoke again, colder this time. You have been my chief financial officer for 11 years. Daniel swallowed carefully. Yes. And tonight is the first time I have heard about a holding group tied directly to duplicated company assets. Daniel looked toward Claire again before answering. Because until tonight nobody went searching for problems that were not there. Claire almost smiled faintly at that sentence. Not because it was convincing, because desperate people always revealed themselves eventually. Ethan noticed the expression. What? Claire looked toward Daniel calmly. He keeps saying nobody should have noticed. Daniel immediately snapped back. Because there was nothing suspicious to notice. Claire tilted her head slightly beneath the hallway lighting. Then why are you nervous? Silence crashed heavily between them. Daniel looked genuinely angry now. Not controlled executive irritation. Fear disguised as anger. Ethan recognized the difference immediately because he built his career reading negotiation rooms before contracts were signed. Daniel stepped forward sharply. You are letting a hotel waitress manipulate your judgment. Ethan answered without raising his voice. No, his eyes shifted briefly toward Claire. I think she is simply observing things the rest of us ignored. The sentence hit Daniel harder than accusation itself. Claire realized why instantly. Betrayal survives longest inside environments where nobody questions familiar faces. Daniel spent years becoming trusted enough to disappear into normalcy. Claire disrupted that invisibility by paying attention. Downstairs, faint piano music floated upward through the open atrium, while elevator doors chimed softly somewhere deeper inside the hotel. Chicago continued moving beneath snowfall outside, completely unaware that one conversation inside a luxury hallway might collapse an entire corporate empire by morning. Ethan extended his hand calmly. Give me your room key. Daniel blinked once. Excuse me. Your suite key. Ethan's voice remained dangerously controlled now. I want every acquisition file transferred to my office tonight. Daniel laughed again weakly. You cannot be serious. Ethan never moved. Room key. Daniel looked trapped suddenly. Claire noticed his breathing change first. Faster now. Shoulders tighter. Eyes calculating exits instead of arguments. Then another conference room door quietly opened farther down the hallway, and an older hotel employee stepped out carrying fresh linens. Daniel glanced toward the distraction instinctively. Another mistake. Ethan saw everything now. You know, Claire said softly into the silence. People usually look toward exits when they already know the conversation is ending badly. Daniel turned toward her sharply. You think you are smarter than everybody because you memorize behavior? Claire answered honestly. No, her eyes remained steady. I think people reveal themselves eventually. Ethan held out his hand one final time. Daniel stared at him for several painful seconds before finally reaching into his pocket and handing over the black room key card slowly. Ethan accepted it without speaking. The power shift inside the hallway became impossible to ignore now. Daniel understood it too. For the first time all night, the executive no longer looked like a confident financial strategist. He looked like a man realizing control had quietly left his hands 30 minutes earlier inside a restaurant, when a waitress noticed one duplicated number. Ethan slipped the key card into his coat pocket calmly. Go home tonight, Daniel. Daniel stared at him carefully. You are making a mistake. Ethan's eyes hardened beneath the warm hotel lighting. Maybe. Then after one quiet second, he added, but if I am wrong, tomorrow embarrasses me. His gaze sharpened slightly. If she is right, tomorrow destroys you. Daniel said nothing after that. He turned slowly and walked down the hallway toward the elevators while snow continued falling beyond the windows behind him. Claire watched silently until the elevator doors closed. Then finally Ethan exhaled quietly for what felt like the first time in an hour. The hallway suddenly felt colder now. He looked toward Claire beside the service tray. You really saw all of that from a watch engraving and body language? Claire adjusted the edge of the tray gently. Not all of it. Ethan waited. Claire's voice lowered softly. The important clue was not the duplicated numbers. Then what was? Claire looked toward the elevator where Daniel disappeared moments earlier. He was afraid before anybody accused him. Ethan stared at her silently beneath the dim conference floor lights. Because deep down he understood something uncomfortable now. Claire Bennett had not simply exposed suspicious numbers tonight. She exposed how easily powerful people stop seeing truth once trust becomes convenient. By midnight, the Marlowe Grand Hotel felt suspended outside normal time. Snow buried the streets of downtown Chicago beneath white silence, while only a handful of guests remained inside the dim restaurant lounge. Most of the staff cleaned quietly around empty tables, while soft piano music echoed through the nearly vacant room like something drifting from another decade. Claire Bennett stood near the coffee station organizing receipts beneath warm golden lights while exhaustion settled heavily into her shoulders. But her mind remained sharp. Too many details from tonight still moved together inside her thoughts like pieces of a puzzle, finally beginning to reveal the larger picture underneath. Near the lounge windows, Ethan Cole sat alone reviewing files from Daniel Mercer's hotel suite spread across the polished table beside untouched coffee. His dark suit jacket rested over the chair now, sleeves rolled slightly upward for the first time all evening. Claire noticed that immediately. Powerful men rarely loosened control in visible ways unless pressure finally reached beneath the surface. Ethan stared at page after page beneath the low lighting while snow continued sliding across the windows behind him. Fake subsidiaries, layered holding companies, misreported acquisition expenses. Years of carefully buried manipulation hidden beneath financial language most people would never question. Claire approached quietly carrying fresh coffee. You have not touched the last one. Ethan glanced up briefly. This one will probably end the same way. Claire placed the new cup beside the documents carefully. People make worse decisions when they stop sleeping. Ethan leaned back slightly while rubbing tired fingers across his temple. People also make worse decisions when they trust the wrong person for 11 years. Claire remained silent for a moment. Then softly, trust is not weakness. Ethan gave a dry laugh beneath the chandelier glow. Tonight it feels expensive. Claire looked down at the scattered papers across the table. Most betrayals are. Ethan watched her quietly after that. There it was again. The strange calmness she carried while discussing things that would emotionally destroy most people. No dramatics. No judgment, just truth spoken gently enough to survive being heard. Ethan closed one file slowly. You said your father gambled away 3 houses. Claire folded her hands lightly behind her back. Yes. How old were you? Old enough to recognize panic before adults admitted it existed. Ethan studied her expression carefully. That is why you notice patterns so quickly. Claire gave a faint shrug. Some people grow up learning music. I grew up learning warning signs. Silence settled softly between them, while snow reflected pale light against the windows overlooking the city. Ethan looked down again at the documents spread before him. Daniel transferred nearly $18 million through shell acquisitions over 3 years. Claire's eyes lowered briefly toward the files. That means he felt untouchable. Ethan nodded slowly. He almost was. Claire glanced toward him gently now. You trusted him because he understood how you think. Ethan leaned back against the chair. No, his voice lowered slightly. I trusted him because he never challenged me. The sentence lingered heavily between them. Claire understood immediately. Powerful people often surrounded themselves with agreement disguised as loyalty. Ethan stared out toward the snowy Chicago skyline beyond the glass, while distant headlights moved slowly beneath the storm outside. You challenged me the moment we met. Claire almost smiled faintly. You invited it. Ethan actually smiled this time. Small, tired, real. Fair point. Across the restaurant, the younger waitress from earlier finished stacking menus before heading home through the employee entrance. She waved softly toward Claire before disappearing into the snow outside. Suddenly, the enormous luxury lounge felt even quieter now, more intimate. Claire reached for several empty glasses near Ethan's table while he continued reading through the files. Then something made her pause. One invoice. Small detail. Different paper texture from the others. Claire picked it up carefully. Ethan looked up immediately. What? Claire scanned the page silently for several seconds. This signature. Ethan leaned slightly forward. What about it? Claire pointed toward the bottom corner gently. Daniel did not sign this. Ethan frowned. How do you know? Claire rotated the page toward the light. Pressure pattern. Ethan blinked once. Pressure pattern? Claire nodded softly. People apply pressure differently when writing signatures. This one was copied slowly. Ethan stared at her with growing disbelief. You can see that? Claire handed him the paper carefully. Look at the hesitation marks around the capital letters. Ethan studied the signature more closely beneath the warm lighting. Tiny pauses. Uneven pressure. She was right again. Ethan exhaled quietly through his nose while leaning back in stunned silence. Who are you? Claire smiled faintly while collecting another empty coffee cup. Just observant. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, his eyes remained fixed on her now. Observant people notice mistakes. You notice intention. The sentence lingered between them, while soft piano notes drifted across the empty lounge. Claire turned slightly toward the windows where snowfall still buried the city outside. Intentions always leak eventually. Ethan looked at her carefully beneath the dim golden lighting. You should not be serving tables. Claire answered without bitterness. And you should probably not trust people so easily. Ethan laughed softly again, despite himself. Strange. Tonight began with him testing a waitress for amusement during a tense corporate dinner. Now he sat inside an empty luxury restaurant at midnight, realizing she understood human behavior better than most executives inside his billion-dollar company. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. Tomorrow morning the board expects final approval on the Westbridge acquisition. Claire immediately understood the danger. Daniel planned to bury the missing money inside the merger. Ethan nodded once. If the acquisition closes before we expose the fraud, legal responsibility spreads across the entire company. Claire looked down toward the forged invoice again. Then tomorrow morning matters more than tonight. Ethan studied her silently for a moment before asking the question carefully. Would you come to the meeting? Claire froze slightly beside the table. Excuse me. I want you there. Ethan's voice remained calm. You notice things nobody else sees. Claire looked genuinely uncertain for the first time all evening. I am a waitress. Ethan closed the forged invoice slowly beneath the warm restaurant light. No, his eyes met hers steadily across the table. You are the only honest analyst I have found in years. Outside the hotel windows, snow continued falling across Chicago, while somewhere deep inside the quiet lounge, Claire Bennett suddenly realized this story was no longer about a duplicated financial entry or one nervous executive. It was about a powerful man slowly discovering that intelligence does not always arrive wearing expensive suits. At 6:15 the next morning, Chicago still looked buried beneath winter. Snow covered the streets in pale silence while gray dawn light slowly spread across skyscraper windows downtown. Inside the Marlowe Grand Hotel, executives from Cole Dynamics gathered inside the private conference ballroom preparing for the most important merger presentation of the year. Coffee steamed beside stacks of financial reports while assistants hurried between tables adjusting screens, laptops, and seating charts beneath cold white lighting. Nobody inside the room realized the future of the company had already changed overnight. Claire Bennett stood near the back entrance wearing the same dark waitress uniform from the night before, though exhaustion rested visibly beneath her calm eyes now. She held a silver coffee tray against one arm while quietly observing the room. Some executives looked nervous. Others looked bored. Most looked distracted. Ethan Cole entered exactly on time carrying a thin black folder beneath his arm, while conversations immediately softened around him. His expression remained composed, but Claire noticed the difference instantly. He no longer walked into the room assuming control automatically. He walked in watching carefully instead. That was new. Near the conference table, Daniel Mercer sat reviewing presentation documents with visible tension hidden beneath practiced professionalism. His silver watch reflected sharply beneath the overhead lights while his fingers tapped once against the table every few seconds. Same pattern as last night. Same fear trying to disguise itself as irritation. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table while assistants dimmed the lights for the presentation screens. Let us begin. Daniel stood smoothly and approached the digital display at the front of the ballroom. As everyone knows, today's Westbridge acquisition positions Cole Dynamics for major expansion into transportation infrastructure. Claire quietly moved through the room pouring coffee, while Daniel continued speaking confidently about projected revenue, investor confidence, and international growth opportunities. The performance almost looked convincing. Almost. But Claire noticed something nobody else seemed to catch. Daniel avoided discussing specific acquisition breakdowns verbally. Every time detailed financial categories appeared on the screen, he shifted attention toward projected future growth instead, redirecting focus. Again, Ethan noticed Claire watching him from across the room. She gave no dramatic reaction, just one tiny movement. Two fingers lightly tapping once against the coffee tray. Pattern shift. Ethan understood immediately now. Daniel was hiding something again. Near the center table, one board member raised a question. Why were Westbridge subsidiary records adjusted twice during Q3? Daniel answered too quickly. Standard restructuring corrections. Claire saw Ethan's jaw tighten slightly. Another board member nodded without concern and returned attention to the presentation. Powerful people often accepted complicated answers simply because complicated people delivered them confidently. Claire continued pouring coffee calmly beside the board members while Daniel advanced another financial slide across the large digital screen. Then suddenly she stopped moving. One number. Tiny. Hidden near the bottom right corner. Not duplicated this time. Delayed. Claire stared at the screen for 1 second longer before turning toward Ethan instantly. Ethan saw it in her eyes immediately. Something bigger. Daniel continued speaking smoothly. The merger timeline allows. Ethan interrupted quietly. Go back 1 slide. The room fell silent. Daniel hesitated briefly before changing slides backward. Ethan looked toward the lower corner of the screen. Expand the Westbridge transport liabilities. Daniel's expression changed almost invisibly. Those numbers were already audited. Ethan's voice remained calm. Expand them. Claire stood perfectly still beside the coffee tray while the financial breakdown enlarged across the ballroom screen. Several executives leaned forward, now studying the numbers more carefully. Then Claire noticed it again. 3 delayed payment transfers routed through a secondary holding account under temporary deferred status. Not erased. Waiting. Daniel realized too late she saw it. Ethan looked toward him slowly. Why are these liabilities deferred past merger finalization? Daniel adjusted his tie. Temporary holding delays. Claire spoke softly before he could continue. No. Every head inside the ballroom turned toward her instantly. Ethan remained silent. Claire stepped slightly closer toward the screen while still holding the silver coffee tray carefully against one arm. Those are not delays. Daniel's voice sharpened immediately. You are not qualified to speak during this meeting. Claire ignored him completely now. Her eyes stayed on the numbers. The deferred transfers activate 48 hours after acquisition closes. Silence spread across the room. One executive frowned. What does that mean? Claire answered calmly. It means once the merger finalized, liability responsibility transferred legally to Coal Dynamics instead of Westbridge. Another board member leaned forward sharply. How much liability? Claire looked toward the bottom figure quietly. $27 million. The room exploded into overlapping voices instantly. Daniel stepped toward the screen aggressively. That interpretation is completely inaccurate. Claire finally looked directly at him now. Calm eyes. Steady voice. Then why were the transfers delayed until after legal ownership shifted? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words arrived fast enough this time. Ethan slowly stood from his chair beneath the cold ballroom lights. Silence returned immediately. Ethan looked toward the giant financial screen while snow drifted softly beyond the tall conference windows behind him. Then toward Daniel. Answer her. Daniel's confidence finally cracked visibly now. Ethan, this is becoming ridiculous. Ethan's voice lowered dangerously. Answer her. Daniel glanced around the room, searching desperately for support, but nobody moved. Nobody defended him anymore. Because for the first time, everyone inside the ballroom noticed what Claire Bennett noticed hours earlier. Fear. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Fear. Daniel finally snapped under the pressure. You do not understand what investors expected from this merger. Ethan stared at him coldly. So you buried losses inside the acquisition. Daniel's silence confirmed everything. Several executives looked stunned now, while whispers spread quietly across the conference room. Ethan stepped away from the head table slowly, eyes never leaving Daniel. 11 years. His voice remained calm enough to feel dangerous. You sat beside me for 11 years. Daniel looked exhausted suddenly. Older. Smaller somehow. The company needed growth. Ethan shook his head once. No, his eyes shifted briefly toward Claire, standing silently beside the coffee tray. The company needed honesty. The ballroom remained completely still after that sentence. Snow continued falling beyond the conference windows, while pale morning light spread across Chicago outside. And standing quietly in the middle of powerful executives wearing nothing except a waitress uniform and tired eyes, Claire Bennett realized something important. The most dangerous truth inside any room was never the hidden betrayal itself. It was the moment somebody ordinary finally became impossible to ignore. The conference ballroom remained silent long after Daniel Mercer stopped trying to defend himself. Outside the tall windows, snow continued falling across downtown Chicago, while pale morning light reflected softly against the frozen skyline. Inside the room, Executives sat motionless around polished tables covered in coffee cups, scattered reports, and the quiet remains of trust collapsing in real time. Claire Bennett stood near the digital screen, still holding the silver coffee tray against one arm, while every eye in the room slowly shifted toward her now. Not because she demanded attention, because she earned it without trying. Daniel loosened his tie beneath the cold white conference lights, while exhaustion replaced the confidence he carried so carefully the night before. "You think this company survives without aggressive growth?" he asked Ethan sharply. Ethan remained standing near the head of the conference table, calm but colder now. "Not like this." Daniel laughed bitterly under his breath. Easy answer from somebody worth $400 million. Several executives lowered their eyes awkwardly. Ethan never reacted emotionally. "You buried losses inside legal transfers." Daniel spread his hands helplessly. "Because investors only reward perfection." Claire watched quietly from beside the screen. There it was, the real truth finally surfacing beneath the numbers. Fear disguised as ambition. Ethan looked toward the deferred transfer records displayed across the giant screen behind them. "You had options." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not with shareholders expecting impossible growth every quarter." Then his eyes shifted toward Claire suddenly. "You know what the funny part is?" Claire said nothing. Daniel laughed again softly. None of this would have surfaced if she stayed in her lane serving coffee. The room tightened uncomfortably around the sentence. Claire remained completely calm beneath the attention. Ethan noticed that too. Daniel wanted reaction. Anger. Embarrassment. Anything emotional enough to weaken her credibility. But Claire only looked tired now. Tired in the way people become after years of watching adults destroy themselves through pride. Ethan spoke quietly. "You still do not understand what happened here." Daniel looked confused. Ethan glanced briefly toward Claire beside the screen. She noticed the truth because she was paying attention to people. Silence settled again. One older board member removed his glasses slowly. "Ethan." His voice sounded cautious now. "How long has this been happening?" Ethan looked down toward the financial reports spread across the conference table. "Long enough." Another executive whispered softly, "Dear God." Across the ballroom, hotel staff quietly paused near the entrance after sensing the tension inside the room. Nobody interrupted. Even the assistants stopped typing. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows while the heating vents hummed overhead like distant static. Claire slowly set the coffee tray down onto an empty side table at last. Ethan noticed how exhausted she looked now beneath the bright conference lights. She had worked an overnight shift, solved a financial fraud investigation, walked into a corporate boardroom still wearing a waitress uniform, while billion-dollar executives listened to her analysis more carefully than their own advisors. Yet she never once acted superior. That mattered to him more than anything. Daniel finally sat heavily into his chair. Defeated now. Smaller somehow. "What happens next?" Ethan answered honestly. "For you." Silence. "Lawyers." Nobody moved after that. Daniel looked toward the snow outside the windows rather than at anyone in the room. The quiet lasted several long seconds before one board member finally turned toward Claire carefully. "Miss Bennett." Claire looked over softly. "Yes, sir." The older man hesitated briefly. "How exactly did you notice the deferred liability timing?" Several executives leaned forward again, waiting for the answer. Claire thought quietly before speaking. "Because people hiding problems usually move them slightly beyond where others stop looking." Another executive frowned thoughtfully. "Meaning?" Claire stepped toward the digital screen again and pointed gently toward the transfer schedule. Everyone focused on merger approval dates. Her finger shifted slightly lower toward the hidden timeline adjustment. But the liability activation happened after legal ownership transferred. The room stayed silent while she explained it calmly. No ego, no performance, just clarity. Whoever designed this assumed executives would stop paying attention once the merger closed successfully. Ethan watched the board members absorbing every word now. Respect replacing skepticism in real time. One woman near the far end of the table finally smiled faintly. "That is incredibly sharp." Claire lowered her hand quietly. "No," her voice softened. "It is just pattern recognition." Ethan almost smiled beneath the tension. Still humble. Even now. Daniel looked toward her one final time before security quietly entered the ballroom near the side doors. No dramatic scene. No raised voices. Just two calm professionals approaching carefully after receiving instructions from legal counsel upstairs. Daniel stood slowly from his chair. His eyes moved briefly toward Ethan. I really did build half this company beside you. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. That is what makes this painful. Daniel nodded faintly after that. Then he walked toward the ballroom exit beside security without another word. Nobody stopped him. Nobody spoke. The doors closed softly behind him moments later. Silence settled heavily across the conference room afterward while snow continued falling across Chicago outside. Ethan finally exhaled quietly and looked around the table at his stunned executives. The merger is suspended effective immediately. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned him. Because after this morning, the room no longer trusted confidence nearly as much as calm observation. Ethan gathered several financial folders together before his eyes shifted toward Claire, standing near the digital screen beneath the white conference lights. Miss Bennett. Claire looked up slightly. Ethan paused for one strange second. Like a powerful man learning how to speak honestly without authority protecting him first. You saved this company today. Claire shook her head gently. No. Her eyes lowered briefly toward the abandoned coffee tray near the side table. I just noticed what everyone else was too busy to see. The sentence lingered quietly through the ballroom while executives sat surrounded by expensive suits, financial projections, and the ruins of misplaced trust. Ethan watched Claire carefully then. The waitress he challenged less than 12 hours earlier now stood calmly in the center of his executive boardroom after exposing a betrayal hidden beneath millions of dollars and years of loyalty. And somewhere beneath the cold white conference lights, Ethan Cole finally understood something success had never taught him before. Intelligence becomes dangerous the moment it stops needing permission to speak. By early afternoon, news about the suspended Westbridge merger had already begun spreading quietly through Chicago financial circles. Reporters gathered outside Cole Dynamics headquarters beneath falling snow, while investors flooded executive inboxes demanding explanations. Inside the 41st floor corporate offices overlooking the frozen city, tension moved silently through glass hallways and marble conference rooms like electricity before a storm. Employees whispered carefully near elevators while legal teams carried stacks of documents between offices under cold white lighting. But inside Ethan Cole's private office, the atmosphere felt strangely calm. Claire Bennett stood near the massive windows, still wearing her dark waitress uniform beneath a borrowed gray winter coat one assistant insisted she take earlier that morning. Snow drifted softly beyond the skyline, while the city moved far below like another world entirely. Ethan sat behind his desk reviewing updated financial reports in silence. No luxury restaurant now. No polished performance. Just reality stripped clean beneath daylight. Claire glanced around the office quietly. Minimal decoration. Sharp lines. Expensive furniture that somehow still felt lonely. Ethan finally looked up from the documents. You have been awake almost 20 hours. Claire folded her arms lightly against the winter chill near the windows. So have you. Ethan leaned back slightly. Difference is I own the building. Claire almost smiled faintly. Exhaustion does not really care about ownership. That made him laugh softly under his breath again. Strange how easily she did that without trying. Ethan studied her carefully now beneath the muted office lighting. The more time passed, the more impossible it became to view her as ordinary. Not because she demanded attention, because she noticed everything attention usually missed. Human resources already called 3 times, Ethan said calmly. Claire blinked once. Why? Apparently there is concern about a waitress participating in executive fraud exposure. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. That sounds fair. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly. Does it? Claire leaned gently against the window overlooking snowy Chicago below. Most powerful systems protect titles before truth. Ethan watched her quietly after that sentence. You say things like somebody much older. Claire's expression softened slightly. My mother used to work double shifts at a casino outside Milwaukee. Ethan listened silently. Claire continued softly. One night, she found accounting discrepancies inside employee payout records. Snow reflected faint silver light across the office windows while her voice remained calm. Management thanked her publicly. Ethan already understood where the story ended. Then what? Claire looked toward the city below. 3 weeks later, they eliminated her position during restructuring. Ethan's jaw tightened subtly. Because she embarrassed someone important. Claire nodded once. That was the first time I realized honesty sounds noble until money feels threatened. Silence settled heavily through the office after that. Ethan slowly closed the financial report in front of him. You think that will happen again here? Claire answered honestly. I think companies survive by protecting stability first. Ethan stood from behind the desk and walked slowly toward the windows beside her. Snow continued falling across the skyline outside, while distant sirens echoed softly somewhere below. You still stayed this morning. Claire looked toward him calmly. Because innocent employees would have paid for Daniel's decisions if the merger finalized. Ethan studied her face carefully. No ambition there. No manipulation. Just quiet conviction. That unsettled him more deeply than anything else tonight. Most people around power always wanted something. Claire only wanted the truth left intact. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Ethan's assistant entered carrying several folders before stopping awkwardly after noticing Claire inside the office. Sir, legal confirmed federal investigators will review all deferred transfer accounts. Ethan nodded once. Good. The assistant hesitated briefly. Also, her eyes shifted toward Claire uncertainly. Several board members requested information about the consultant involved this morning. Claire almost laughed softly. Consultant. Interesting word for waitress. Ethan answered calmly without looking away from the skyline. Tell them she is under my direct authorization. The assistant blinked in surprise. Yes, sir. After the door closed again, Claire turned slowly toward him. That was unnecessary. Ethan looked at her carefully now. No, his voice lowered slightly. What was unnecessary was a room full of executives needing a waitress to show them where the fraud was hidden. Claire said nothing. Ethan rarely spoke this honestly aloud, especially not about failure. He leaned one hand lightly against the cold glass window. Do you know what bothers me most? Claire waited quietly. Ethan's reflection stared back at him through the snow outside. I tested you the moment we met. His expression hardened slightly toward himself now. I assumed intelligence needed the right suit before it deserved attention. Claire watched him silently beneath the soft office lighting. Ethan shook his head once. Meanwhile, Daniel spent years saying exactly what I wanted to hear. The office fell quiet again except for distant wind against the skyscraper windows. Finally, Claire spoke softly. People who survive difficult lives usually learn something powerful early. Ethan looked toward her. What? Claire's eyes remained steady. Charm and honesty are not the same thing. The sentence settled deeply between them. Ethan almost smiled again, though this one carried sadness behind it. You know, he admitted quietly, most people become nervous around me within 30 seconds. Claire gave a faint shrug. You walk like somebody expecting disappointment. Ethan looked genuinely surprised now. That obvious? Claire glanced back toward the snowy skyline. Only if somebody watches carefully. Somewhere below them, Chicago traffic moved slowly through winter streets while inside the executive office of one of the most powerful companies in the city, silence softened into something unexpectedly human. Ethan looked toward Claire beside the windows. Waitress uniform. Tired eyes. Calm intelligence powerful enough to dismantle years of hidden betrayal simply because she paid attention when everyone else stopped looking. And for the first time in many years, Ethan Cole realized respect felt very different from admiration. Admiration chased status. Respect arrived quietly after truth survived pressure. Another soft knock interrupted the moment. Ethan's assistant entered again, this time looking more nervous than before. Sir. Ethan turned slightly. What now? The assistant swallowed carefully. The board scheduled an emergency press conference for 6 o'clock. Ethan's expression sharpened immediately. Why? The assistant hesitated. They want you to publicly explain why a hotel waitress exposed financial fraud before your executive team did. Silence filled the office once more. Claire lowered her eyes briefly while snow continued falling beyond the windows. But Ethan did not look embarrassed anymore. He looked thoughtful. Because somewhere beneath the cold Chicago sky, the powerful CEO finally understood the real scandal was never that a waitress uncovered the betrayal. The real scandal was how many important people failed to notice it first. At 5:58 that evening, camera flashes lit the marble lobby of Cole Dynamics like winter lightning. Reporters crowded behind velvet barriers while television crews adjusted microphones beneath towering glass ceilings overlooking snowy downtown Chicago. Outside, Freezing wind pushed snow across the sidewalks in silver waves. But inside the corporate headquarters, the atmosphere carried a different kind of storm entirely. Executives moved quickly through the lobby, avoiding eye contact with journalists while assistants whispered into headsets beneath sharp white lighting. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted someone to blame. Ethan Cole stood alone inside the private hallway just outside the press conference room, adjusting the cuffs of his dark suit slowly. For the first time in years, he looked less like a man preparing to control a room and more like somebody preparing to tell the truth inside one. Claire Bennett waited quietly near the hallway windows, wearing the borrowed gray winter coat over her waitress uniform, while snow drifted softly beyond the glass behind her. She never expected to still be here 12 hours after serving coffee inside a luxury hotel restaurant. Yet somehow the entire city now revolved around one simple fact. A waitress noticed what powerful executives ignored. Ethan glanced toward her calmly. "You can still leave before this starts." Claire folded her hands lightly inside the coat pockets. "Would that help you?" Ethan almost smiled faintly. "Probably not." Silence settled comfortably between them now. Different from last night. Less defensive. Less uncertain. Somewhere beyond the conference room doors, reporters raised their voices impatiently, while camera equipment shifted loudly across the floor. Ethan looked toward the sound briefly before speaking again. "You know what the board suggested an hour ago?" Claire tilted her head slightly. "What?" Ethan's expression hardened with quiet disappointment. "They wanted me to say an anonymous internal source discovered the fraud." Claire lowered her eyes for 1 second. Not surprised. Ethan noticed that too. "You expected that." Claire answered honestly. "Most institutions protect appearances first." Ethan stared at her carefully beneath the cold hallway lighting. "And if I did?" Claire looked back toward the snowy skyline outside the windows. "Then tomorrow everyone would continue believing intelligence only matters when important people recognize it first." The sentence stayed with him. Heavy. Precise. True. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose before nodding once toward the conference room doors. "Come with me." Claire blinked softly. "Into the press conference?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan held her gaze evenly now. "Because I spent too many years rewarding the wrong people simply because they looked powerful." The hallway fell quiet again, while snow continued drifting across Chicago outside. Then the conference room doors opened, and an assistant stepped out nervously. "Sir, they are ready." Ethan nodded once. "Good." He looked toward Claire beside the windows. "You do not have to speak if you do not want to." Claire gave a faint, tired smile. "That has not stopped people from listening today." Ethan laughed softly under his breath. Together they walked into the press conference ballroom beneath blinding camera flashes and immediate noise. Reporters stood quickly while microphones lifted toward the stage. Questions exploded across the room before Ethan even reached the podium. "Mr. Cole, did executives knowingly hide financial liabilities? How long did the fraud continue? Is the merger permanently canceled? Who uncovered the financial discrepancies?" Ethan remained calm while taking his place behind the podium beneath harsh white stage lights. Claire stopped several feet behind him near the side curtain, hoping quietly to disappear into the background again. But reporters already noticed her. The waitress uniform beneath the gray coat made that impossible. Ethan rested both hands lightly against the podium while silence slowly returned across the room. Snow continued falling beyond the enormous conference windows behind the cameras. "This morning," Ethan began calmly, "Cole Dynamics suspended the Westbridge acquisition after discovering concealed liabilities tied to deferred financial transfers." Reporters immediately started writing while cameras flashed endlessly across the ballroom. Ethan continued steadily. "An internal investigation is now underway alongside federal financial review teams." One reporter raised her voice sharply. "Who discovered the hidden liabilities?" The room quieted instantly after that question. Ethan looked briefly toward Claire, standing near the curtains beneath the cold conference lights. Then back toward the reporters. "A waitress." Silence hit the ballroom harder than shouting ever could. Several reporters blinked in visible confusion. Ethan's voice remained calm. "Last night, during a dinner meeting at the Marlowe Grand Hotel, Claire Bennett noticed inconsistencies inside financial acquisition documents after observing behavioral patterns most executives overlooked." More silence. More flashing cameras. Ethan continued before anyone interrupted. This morning, she identified deferred liabilities capable of transferring $27 million of concealed losses directly into our company after merger finalization. A reporter near the front frowned. You are saying a hotel waitress exposed fraud your executive board missed. Ethan answered immediately. Yes. No embarrassment. No hesitation. Just truth spoken clearly enough to survive public attention. Across the ballroom, Claire stood completely still while dozens of reporters turned toward her now. Some looked shocked, others skeptical. A few looked uncomfortable. Ethan noticed all of it. Then he said something nobody inside the room expected. The real problem is not that she noticed. His eyes moved slowly across the executives seated near the side wall. The real problem is how many highly educated people stopped paying attention long before she entered the room. Silence spread again. Deep this time. Human. Honest. One older reporter finally looked toward Claire carefully. Miss Bennett. Claire lifted her eyes softly. Yes. How did you know something was wrong? Every camera in the room shifted toward her beneath the bright stage lights. Claire hesitated briefly before answering quietly. Because people hiding the truth usually spend more energy protecting appearances than protecting others. No performance. No dramatic pause. Just one calm sentence. Yet somehow the entire ballroom fell completely silent afterward. Ethan watched the reporters absorbing her words now while snow drifted endlessly beyond the glass skyline outside. Then slowly, almost without realizing it, the powerful CEO smiled faintly beside the podium. Not because the scandal was over, not because the company survived, but because somewhere between a luxury hotel dinner and a corporate press conference beneath a Chicago snowstorm, he finally learned something success alone could never teach him. The quietest people in the room are often the ones seeing everything.